So we're all pretty aware that there is a gut-brain axis because there's a lot of studies and a lot of talk about how the bacteria in our gut influence our mood, our focus, depression, and different conditions like ADD and autism and behavioral issues in children and adults. But there's not a lot of attention being paid to the gut-heart axis because it's such a novel concept. The earliest mention of the term gut-heart axis was in 2017. So I'm going to just review some of the findings that I put together for my thesis paper on the gut-heart axis and probiotics as therapy for this. So to review, we have the gut bacteria, which talks to the heart to create either disease or health. And I found studies that show gut dysbiosis and pathogenic gut flora is associated with heart failure, coronary artery disease, calcifications, high calcium scores, and atrial fibrillation, and just a general stiffening of the arteries. And on the side, I found gut dysbiosis to be associated with gallbladder stones because you have poor bile acid synthesis and hypertension. So we're going to just get into that. People who have SIBO, this one study took people who had SIBO who were otherwise healthy. They had a subclinical atherosclerosis, and they found that their arteries were stiffer, not necessarily calcified yet, but they had stiffening of the arteries. So the authors concluded that SIBO could potentially be an indicator of subclinical atherosclerosis. And so many people have that. But it makes sense if we're thinking about how the gut microbiome influences the brain, the heart, the kidneys. Basically, the gut is its own endocrine organ. Other conditions that this was associated with, chronic heart failure. So people who had the worst chronic heart failure had the worst in more advanced gut dysbiosis. They had massive quantities of Candida, shigella, campylobacter, salmonella, Yersinia, enterococcus, and that was because these bacterial toxins release lipopolysaccharides, which are these endotoxins, and they stimulate the immune system just a little bit every day, and they make the immune system secrete inflammatory cytokines. They're kind of irritating. It's like if you were to take your finger and do this for 3 hours. It doesn't hurt right now, but in 3 hours it's gonna probably irritate your skin. It's gonna be red, and that's pretty much what lipopolysaccharides do. Atrial fibrillation, this was interesting. So this is one of the biggest causes of ablations or like stroke, and this was associated with highest amounts of E.coli, streptococcus, enterococcus, and ruminococcus. Coronary artery disease was associated with high amounts of collinsella aerofaciens, enterococcus, megamonas, and shigella. Vascular calcifications. This one was associated with overgrowth of prevotella, copri. And just a quick note about calcifications, that was a big part of my paper. So in your gut creates menaquinone 7 or vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 is synthesized predominantly by the gut, of course, and its main function is to inhibit calcium from displacing from your bones into arteries, calcifying them and making them stiff. So if you've ever had a high calcium score, that's what that means. And it could be that you might have a deficiency in MK7, your gut bacteria are not producing it. But then if you think about that deeper, why is your gut bacteria not producing it? Is it possibly because you have gut dysbiosis? You don't have enough good gut flora? You have these overgrowths of Candida and E.coli and strep that are just messing with everything? Possibly. Severe atherosclerosis was associated with high amounts of klebsiella, Clostridium, ruminococcus, and Roseburia. And some of these are able to be seen on the GI map stool test, which is really cool because I can make an intervention with antimicrobial herbs and giving probiotics. And the researchers kept saying that this could be a novel way for gastroenterologists or whoever's running a stool test to possibly identify an early risk person or a person who's at risk for having these various cardiovascular diseases based on their microbial profile. The last one, this one was super interesting. So they had coronary plaque. So they took cadavers, like 40 cadavers, people who had died of cardiovascular issues from like age 20 to 90, and then they compared them with controls, living controls who are healthy. They tested the lesions inside of their arteries, the plaque, and they found highest amount of streptococcus bacteria was inside of those coronary artery lesions, whereas the people who were controlled, they did like stool tests and they did not have the highest amount of streptococcus bacteria like these people did. So they concluded strep was associated with high coronary artery disease again. Okay, so now we get to the good stuff. What do we do about this? Well, probiotics might be used as therapy. So they had I put together a chart of different like studies I could find because it's kind of limited. This is such a new novel concept of the gut-heart axis. So with arterial stiffness, they gave 12 weeks. They gave participants 5 strains of bifidobacterium, 4 strains of lactobacillus, and 2 strains of lactococcus. And they found that at the conclusion of the 12 weeks, they had significant decreases in blood pressure, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, VEGF, all inflammatory chemicals, cytokines, all markers of arterial stiffness significantly decreased just from a probiotic. Coronary artery disease, they gave them 20 billion CFUs of Lactobacillus plantaris for 6 weeks, and they had significant reduction of all inflammatory cytokines. The arterial flow improved, the leptin decreased, and the vasodilation, the opening of the arteries, was improved significantly. Heart failure. These are people who had the worst heart failure with less than 50% of their ventricle ejection fraction. So they gave them Saccharomyces boulardii, 1 gram for 3 months, and they had a significantly decreased cholesterol, increased in their artery flow, decreased in their C-reactive protein, their systemic inflammation, and the decrease in their uric acid just from giving a probiotic. Now we look at the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So we have dyslipidemia, so high cholesterol, high LDL cholesterol, and some research believes that that is not a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. I'm open to reading different research. I'm not set that this is one, but I do think it's still considered a cardiovascular risk factor, so I'm going to include it in here. So probiotic therapy was looking at 13 studies. It was a meta-analysis, and we have here Lactobacillus reuteri was used for 9 weeks. These people had significant reductions in LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, and the pro-atherogenic lipoproteins, the tiny ones that like to clog and cause all kinds of atherosclerosis. They had decreased significantly with just a probiotic. And then we have hypertension. So I posted about this one a few weeks ago. People with hypertension were found to have higher amounts of klebsiella and Clostridium and strep. So they gave them Lactobacillus casei for only 2 months, and they had a significant drop in blood pressure, blood glucose, cholesterol, and they found that this mechanism is because the gut bacteria decreases sympathetic dominance of the nervous system. That's your fight or flight system. So just giving a probiotic was able to modulate the nervous system and the cortisol response, which would help modulate the blood pressure. It's so cool to think just that one thing would make such a difference. So, can bacteria be an indicator of cardiovascular risk? And my theory is yes. I think that as this evolves, I think gastroenterologists are going to need to be trained to understand this stuff, because I've never heard anybody talk about this before, unless there's somebody who's into functional medicine. Like, to connect the bacteria in the gut with heart conditions, it's just not something that many doctors even go to. So this was really eye-opening for me, because now I look at things in a totally different way, and I am even better now when I'm going through somebody's GI map stool test, and I could see if they have cardiovascular risks or hyperlipidemia or hypertension, or they have atrial fibrillation. I'm like, well, let's look at your gut. Let's see what you've got in there. So this was really fun, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.